They'll say, I need space. But when you do give them space, suddenly you're the one who's cold and distant. They'll say, be honest with me. And when you are honest, you're suddenly too intense or too emotional or too dramatic. If you've ever tried to set a boundary with a narcissistic person and then somehow ended up being the bad guy anyway, it's not just you imagining things, because narcissists don't actually hate boundaries. They just hate it when you try to set any boundaries. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. Around here, we talk a lot about how childhood trauma and emotional dysregulation shape the way we relate to love, to our own boundaries, and to our own self-worth. And we do this because we want to be able to build relationships that are healthy and that are long-lasting and not just intense. Some of you have sent me messages describing limerence situations you're stuck in. And I want to talk about something that's come up again and again in your messages and in your emails. It's clear that many of you are not just dealing with a painful emotional obsession, you're also dealing with people who are actively narcissistic and who are using your attention and affection to fuel their own self-worth and their own need for validation. And when you're limerent, when your brain is obsessed and fixated and addicted to the hope that maybe this person will love you, it's incredibly, incredibly hard to spot narcissistic behavior and abuse. Because even when you do try to set proper boundaries, or when you try to walk away, the other person twists it into some sort of insult or a rejection. Or worse, they flip things around and they make you feel guilty for trying to protect yourself. And this is a really big problem when you're in a one-sided or going nowhere episode of limerence and you're trying to break contact with the other person. This is what many of you are stuck in. It's what keeps you emotionally tethered to someone who keeps pulling you in or keeps playing with you emotionally just to push you away in the end anyway. And we're talking about narcissistic behavior in a general sense, but also as it relates to limerence, because it's quite common in limerence to connect with people who are broken in some way, whether that's because they're deeply avoidant and they haven't reached some sort of way to move towards secure attachment, or because they're narcissists, and sometimes just because they're suffering from some sort of emotional or personality disorder that makes them especially appealing to those of us who become limerent, meaning it makes them inconsistent or unstable or lacking impulse control or lacking proper boundaries, and makes them the kinds of people who are more likely to be emotionally dysregulated themselves. And perhaps more likely to use our emotions to serve themselves.
Wait, did you subscribe yet? I have a lot more to share and I'd love to have you here for it. It really helps my channel grow and I appreciate it so much.
So today I want to walk you through some of the common ways that narcissists use your boundaries against you. Not just to hurt you, but also to keep you in a constant state of confusion and of guilt and emotional limbo in general, so that if you do recognize this in a person that you're involved with, perhaps it will give you the incentive you need to push yourself to walk away. So let's start at the very beginning with the most important part. And this isn't always obvious, especially if you come from a background of some sort of emotional trauma. A boundary is not something that you set as a punishment against the other person. It's not about controlling someone else or trying to change the other person's behavior. That would be more of a demand that you can make, or even an ultimatum. A boundary, when it's done right, is for you. Is for your own protection. It exists to maintain your emotional well-being. Sometimes your physical well-being, because we know how deeply intertwined our emotional health is to our physical health. So our own boundaries are not about us being difficult or about being unreasonable. They're about being clear, both with ourselves and with other people, about what we are willing to tolerate and what we're not willing to tolerate, so that we can stay emotionally safe and well. So, for example, let's say that you are in a conversation with your partner and they raise their voice in the middle of an argument. A boundary would sound like you saying, if you raise your voice at me, I'm going to walk away from this conversation. Notice you're not trying to control them. You're not demanding that they lower their voice, although of course you can do that, and it's a reasonable thing to ask the other person to do, to lower their voice. But whether they respond or not is not really under your control. You're simply stating what you are going to do in response to their behavior. Because you can't control their tone, but you can quietly remove yourself from a situation that feels unsafe. That's a boundary. And that boundary, it serves you, as it should. Another example, let's say that you're involved with someone in a connection that's not quite a relationship, not quite a friendship, and you're confused about where it's going. And the other person doesn't give you any clear signals about what they want or what they're available for. Setting a boundary in this case might sound like you saying, I'd like you to know that I'm not available for situationships or for casual relationship or for casual intimacy. What I want is a relationship. If that's what you're looking for, great. I'm totally on board. If instead you're looking for something casual, that's totally fine, but I'm not the right person for you. Please let me know if that's the case so that we're both on the same page. Notice you're not demanding that the other person also want a relationship with you. You're not trying to guilt the other person into wanting something more with you. You're simply saying, this is what I need. I respect whatever you want. All I'm asking for is clarity so I can make a decision for myself. And you leave it right there. In both of these examples, you're not threatening. You're not shaming the other person. You're simply being clear and calm like an adult about what you need in order to feel okay. But here's the problem. When you're dealing with someone narcissistic, your calm and clear boundary, it doesn't translate as a neutral message. It comes across to them as a threat to their control over you, because control is a huge part of how narcissistic people function in relation to other people. When you set a firm boundary, especially one that makes it clear that you intend to stick with it, what you're really saying is, you don't get to dictate how I feel. I want my life set up in a way that protects me and my emotional state and keeps my emotional state in my own hands. So I'm not going to let you manipulate my feelings by pulling me close and then pushing me away, by yelling during a conflict to intimidate me, to scare me into complying with whatever you're saying, or by creating so much stress that I give in out of fear. And for someone with strong narcissistic tendencies, that's a big problem. Not every narcissist is the same, and not every person with narcissistic traits is fully toxic. But if a person's whole pattern of relating to others relies on controlling the other person's emotional state, then boundaries will be seen as a direct threat. And that's why narcissists don't just ignore your boundaries. They weaponize them against you. They twist them. They flip things around to make it seem like you're the one doing something wrong. And it's very effective. Here are some common ways that narcissistic people respond when you try to set what are actually just healthy boundaries. And I want to preface this section by saying, just because someone displays one or more of these behaviors at some point, it does not automatically make them a full-blown narcissist. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're incapable of being in a relationship. These are, unfortunately, fairly common behaviors in toxic dynamics. And sometimes they come from a lack of self-awareness. Sometimes they come from deep insecurity. It doesn't always mean that the person is a monster. The only way to truly understand if someone has narcissistic traits or if they are a true narcissist is to zoom out. What does the big picture tell you? Is their overall pattern of behavior consistent with narcissism? Or are you seeing occasional traits pop up in moments of stress or conflict? Neither one is acceptable, but one can perhaps be worked with. That being said, let's talk about some examples. So, number one, you ask for clarity. You say, I'd like to know if you're interested in building a relationship or if you're interested in something casual. The other person says, why do you need to label everything? Can't we just enjoy what we have? Or, my ex was always trying to put a label on everything. She could never just enjoy the moment. This is why it didn't work out with her. And suddenly your need for emotional clarity is now being reframed as being too intense or too needy, or my personal favorite, too much like my ex, who I didn't end up with. And just like that, the other person dodges the question altogether without ever answering it. And now you're left holding all the ambiguity while they're sort of floating above it like they're just going with the flow, and you're incapable of doing that. But the implication is clear. If you need clarity, there must be something wrong with you. You're no fun. And if you demand clarity, well, then clearly this won't work out, just like it didn't work out with their ex, right? That's straight manipulation any day of the week. The correct answer to this question is only yes, I'm interested in us building a relationship together, or no, I prefer something casual with no strings. Both of these are straightforward and honest and absolutely reasonable answers. And you can't get mad if the other person says, I'm not interested, but at least having clarity is a start. Another example is you try to go no contact. You tell the other person you're done with the relationship you're having, or you simply say nothing and you block contact with them, or you just make it clear that you'd like to cut off all contact. Whether you explain yourself or not, that's up to you. It's, depends on the relationship, but either way, that is a clear and firm boundary. Instead of letting it go, the other person says things like, I guess you were never serious about me in the first place, or I guess you didn't like me as much as you let on. Or they text you from a different number, or they find other ways to contact you, or they post vague, dramatic things on social media aimed directly at you, referencing your past conversations. All of these are unfortunately very predictable ways that someone refuses to respect your boundary of no contact. And this is especially common in situationships or toxic relationships where the other person is still hungry for your attention and your validation. Because to them, it's not so much about closure as it is about regaining control. The implication being, if you walk away on your own terms, that means they don't get the last word. And that is not something that narcissists appreciate or tolerate very well. Another common example of how we might end up in toxic relationships or become deeply limerent for people who are not able to offer us anything substantial. You become involved with someone who's only looking for part of a relationship, namely intimacy, right? Super common. At some point, you realize that's what's happening and you attempt to set a boundary. So you might say something like, I'm not comfortable hooking up if we're not emotionally involved or if we're not in a relationship. The other person responds with, wow, so we can't even have fun anymore? You're way too serious. See how that works? In a roundabout way, your interest in having a real connected relationship has now been reframed as you being boring or uptight. But the implication there is that if you don't keep participating in last-minute casual intimacy with me, then you're not fun. You're too serious and not worth my time. And for those of you who are involved in a toxic relationship with someone who displays these kinds of behaviors, or if you're limerent over someone who behaves in this way, it can be incredibly hard to break free because it's hard to tell the difference between when you're setting a proper and healthy boundary and when you're actually doing something wrong, because the other person is working to take away your clarity. The other person is focused on gaining control over you and twisting your boundaries into proof that you are the problem. And this gets even trickier if you're still dealing with CPTSD, or your nervous system is dysregulated, or if you had inconsistent and emotionally unsafe relationships with your parents when you were young, because all of that already wires you to very easily blame yourself, to appease and to overfunction in your personal relationships. So your first instinct becomes crushing your own needs and assuming that you're the one who's ruining what could have been a beautiful connection. But your job toward yourself is to recognize that if someone is constantly crossing your boundaries, you are not just dealing with limerence or with a toxic relationship that you fell into by mistake. You're dealing with someone who's using you to serve themselves. And continuing to stay involved with someone like that will only cause more damage to you. This is why in the end, it is only up to us to advocate for ourselves and to be our own biggest protectors. So why is this pattern so common in limerence? Why is it that so many of us end up connecting with people who have some kind of emotional dysregulation, who are emotionally unstable or narcissistic or just really difficult to connect with? Why do so many limerent episodes revolve around people who are sometimes even emotionally abusive? Well, because narcissists are experts at triggering all the feelings that limerence feeds on: uncertainty, obsession, craving, and powerlessness. A narcissist can give you just enough contact to keep you hooked, just enough attention to keep your hope alive. And then when it doesn't serve them anymore, they'll withdraw enough to get you to panic and reach back out to them over and over again. And this might look like one day they're making grand declarations of love, and the next day they're disappearing completely, or they're suddenly too busy to text you back. Narcissists are really good at almost loving you, at almost choosing you, or at almost being someone who could be a good partner. That's kind of the whole game for narcissists, to keep you stuck in the almost, in the possibility that something real might develop, while using you as supply for themselves. But in limerence, that almost is your trap, because your brain doesn't fully register that it's being manipulated. It just knows that it craves that feeling it gets when this person gives you attention and affection and validation and is reciprocating your feelings. That's what makes limerence even harder to escape when you're dealing with someone who's emotionally dysregulated or abusive or narcissistic, because your brain gets stuck in this hope-based panic that can go on indefinitely. A narcissist is not going to give up your attention if you're willing to give it. Don't hope for that. Your validation is so valuable to them. And if they can keep you at arm's length or just close enough to get what they want without ever fully committing or doing anything real with you, that is the holy grail. That is the ideal for them. So what I want you to remember, especially if you're stuck in a limerent episode with someone who routinely disrespects your boundaries, or if you're in a toxic relationship with someone like that, this is not just the case of you loving too much. It's not about you being too sensitive or too emotionally intense for the other person. You are likely in a dynamic where someone is using your emotions against you, or is using your emotions to manipulate you. If you're noticing these kinds of behaviors that we talked about in this video, your openness and honesty and loyalty to this person, your empathy, all of that is being manipulated. Your desire to connect with this person is actually keeping you stuck. It's keeping you small, because when you feel small, you're too afraid to demand any more, and you're too afraid to set up any proper boundaries. But with someone who is narcissistic, you don't need to set stronger boundaries just to keep tolerating their behavior. You simply need to walk away and leave the situation altogether. Boundaries can be used as filters that can help you sort out who gets close to you and who doesn't, who deserves your time and your energy and your attention, and who just needs to be let go. If you feel like someone is constantly testing you in this way just to see how far they can go, that is not a sign that this person is your soulmate, that this person loves you. That is a magnetizing red flag. It hooks you, but it still means danger. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've been caught in something like this, let me know in the comments. What does it feel like for you? And if you want to keep unpacking this kind of dynamic together, consider subscribing so we can keep going together. Until next time.